One clear difference between how business is run and how the government runs is that if the United States government were a business, we'd almost certainly be in Chapter 11 right now. We've been running 40 years consistently with deficits. We now have debt of $11.8 trillion. That debt is going parabolic. If our creditors were to all get together and say, let's take a look at the United States and whether we should lend them another $9 trillion over the next 10 years, which is what the government wants to do, they would say, gee, this is a government that gets $1.8 trillion a year in tax revenue, and the debt is 6 to 7 times what your annual revenue is. And you're losing a tremendous amount of money, and you're projecting nothing but red ink for the future. This is not sustainable. Now, the only reason that the government can do this is because, at the moment, they have a very low cost of capital, and they have a perception that they have unlimited ability to print money. And this, of course, a business can't do. In business, capital is a very scarce resource, and you've got to operate on budgets. And I believe that this is something that has to happen. There's got to be discipline brought to this. And I thought, well, for 50 years, we've really had this problem, and it's transcended administrations. In 1960, which is sort of a year that most of you are old enough to remember, the United States had the 10 largest banks in the world, the 3 largest auto companies in the world. Every single industry you can think of, the leading companies were American. And the dollar was backed by gold. Now, at that time, Washington was a small town. President Eisenhower was in his last year of his administration. And you could often go a week or 2 or 3 at a time sometimes without seeing President Eisenhower on TV. But the United States had just finished the greatest wealth-building decade in the history of mankind. And over the last 40 years or so, 50 years, we've seen the government increase by a factor of 29 times over what it was in 1960, while doing essentially the same tasks that it did in 1960. In 1980, President Reagan had noticed that the government was now 7, 8 times bigger than it was 20 years earlier, and he said, we've got to limit government. But he couldn't do it. It just kept on ballooning. And I've been trying to think, and I'll be very brief with this point, I've been trying to understand why, because there's a lot of good people who go to Washington, and they've not been able to get a handle on this. I know Senator McConnell's been working very hard with a number of his colleagues to do this. But one observation I've had, and I'm glad to see that so many people in the business school are trying to get into politics, is Washington right now is dominated by lawyers, bankers, and academics. And the Congress in particular is dominated by lawyers. And the nature of these professions is that you speak and you write and you allocate money. And once all the words have been spoken and been written and money's been allocated, they think the job is done. Those of us who have graduated from this school know for sure that that's when the job begins, when the money is allocated. And you've got to manage organizations, and you've got to fine-tune them, and when they go off course, turn them around and manage costs. I see that as being very lacking, but that's when the job begins.
But we have less volatility in New Hampshire. Senator, did you want to make a comment?
I'm just going to ask our conservative parliamentarian. I expect, regardless of party, there's probably a pretty broad agreement in here that the government, the U.S. government, spends too much, taxes too much, borrows too much, is way too big. If the Tories are lucky enough to be in power next year, do you intend to take on the National Health Service, which I'm told, correct me if I'm wrong, is the 3rd largest employer in the world?
Yes, it is. I think it's the Chinese Army and the Indian Post Office. An excellent observation. Given I'm a whip, there are certain things I'm not allowed to comment on. That's one of those.
I think that's an excellent observation that you've made, and I've seen that myself. But there was an interesting article in the Boston Globe on Wednesday, and I was very surprised to actually see it in the Boston Globe. It said that of the 1.9 million civilian employees of the federal government, the average salary was $79,197. By contrast, private sector employees earn $49,935, a difference of $29,000. When you add in benefits, the public sector employees with benefits and early retirement and so forth, $120,000 a year versus $60,000 a year. Now, what this means is that the private sector, which is really the engine that provides the capital for our government, is paying benefits to public sector employees that we can't afford to pay to our own employees. So there's bloat in two directions. Number one, letting pay get out of hand, and number two, letting number of employees get out of hand.
How is it being used? Why is it not effective? Why is it not more effective? And those are the important questions to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I'm going to ask Jim and Tom and Brooks just to take a minute with their responses, because I really want to have time to open it up to all of you so we can get a discussion. Jim?
Okay, 1 minute. Let's see. I guess one of the things I think business and government differ, at least my perception, is that in business, you get more responsibility by doing a good job with the responsibility that you've already got. And I'd like to see the government focus on doing essential things and doing them well and doing them efficiently. And I was struck by a town hall meeting that I listened to recently where the president was explaining that there was no need to worry about health insurance companies going out of business because they're going to do just fine. And as his proof statement, he used Federal Express and UPS and said, they're doing great. It's the post office that's having problems. And I said, I've got to take a look at this. I mean, the post office is one of our most mature government agencies. It's been around for over 100 years. They have $60 billion in revenue. They process about 160 billion pieces of mail year in, year out. How could this agency not be making money? But if it is having problems, then I would say, let's focus on getting the post office right before we start taking over the automotive industry and the banking industry and the insurance industry.